I looked at your Instagram bio and I love your the little like bio you have. It says, "I'm not a counselor, not a coach, just a husband and father who wants to learn what love requires of me." So my first question is, how and when and why did you get into social media? You said you've been doing it for about a year now.
Yeah. So, well, it's a little bit of a tragic story. So I'll make it short, but I'll try to tell you all the details. So, unfortunately, earlier in my marriage, I had an affair. So I sexually betrayed my wife.
This was before kids?
No, this was just shortly after kids. And so we've been married for 10 years. We have 4 kids and 9. So, so when that happened, that was obviously like an atomic bomb to the marriage, as it should be. And so she decided that she was going to give me another chance that I didn't deserve. And so I went deep into, how do I make this right? How do I figure out why this happened? Because I didn't want to lose my family. And so many people are in that spot where they just do, I'm not going to say they do stupid things. Like, I'm not going to brush it off as like, it was, oh, I didn't know. Like, no, you knew what you were doing was terrible. But sometimes there's reasons why we do those things. And sometimes we're hiding it deep within ourselves. So that was the beginning of a self-reflection journey where I decided I need to figure out what's going on with me, because affairs happen for a reason. Cheating happens. There's a reason why people do the things that they do. And so I decided I'm going to figure out why this happened. And then I'm also going to figure out how to fix it. And if this can be fixed, I'm going to figure out a way to fix this. And so that was the start of a self-reflection journey and a trust rebuilding journey. And once I got into that, I just realized, it just became more and more fascinating to me. I realized relationships are so important in our life, and it's so quickly we can, especially when kids come along and we got work and kids and stress and in-laws and all this other stuff, just life happens. And we so quickly put our relationship on the back burner, and we just don't give it the importance. We don't give it the credit that it deserves. And when we neglect it, even unintentionally, it can fall apart quick. If you're not on top of it, just like anything in life, you will slowly drift away from each other if you're not intentionally taking steps towards each other. So, the more I learned, the more I was just fascinated with relationships in general. Why do they fail? Why do they stay together? Is it just chance? Is it just because everybody that's in a bad relationship, at some point they've thought, I'm just with the wrong person. Like, clearly I thought this was the right person. X, Y, and Z happened. And now I must have just picked wrong, And so it's fascinating to me to really dive into that world and figure out what's actually going on underneath the surface. What are the major roadblocks in most relationships where one or both people just can't see the forest through the trees, I guess is a good way to say it. So anyways, that started a long journey of learning about relationships. And so, like I said in the bio, I love the way that like, what does love require of us? Because like, we could all say that we love our partners, but like, what does that actually require of us? Because love isn't just a feeling, the feeling can just change like with circumstances. So what does love actually demand from us? And a lot of times it's things that are difficult, like selflessness and consideration and humility and curiosity and validation and empathy and all these things. And so, not to bore you, but then once we get into that, it's like, okay, but is everyone capable of those things? Like, what are the big roadblocks that get in the way? Because not everyone's capable of empathy, or a lot of people struggle with vulnerability. Why are they struggling with this? So, I struggled with those too. We all can struggle with those things, but we have to be at least cognizant of how they're affecting our relationships. So that's now what I'm passionate about.
Did you guys go to therapy, or did you do everything?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, that's what I was wondering.
Yeah, after a big betrayal like that, I would encourage everybody to go to therapy. I did not, if I'm being honest, I didn't learn even a small percentage of what I learned from therapy. Therapy was to get us over the hump, to get us into the correct mindset, to stop the bleeding, if you will. But I mean, I just tried to read as many books as I could, which is difficult with four kids. But I just tried to read, and I still read whenever I can. I try to, just so I can learn more and maybe try to help other people in any way that I can.
Do you think having kids, because one of the things that I was thinking about was, like you were saying, it's so easy to put our relationships on the back burner, especially after having kids, because there's so much more going on. And it's the easiest thing to just ignore the romantic relationship and put everything into everything else. Do you think that is partially what happened post children?
So I'll answer your question in the longest way possible,
Perfect.
Renee. So John Gottman did a study. He's anyone who learns about relationships or studies relationships knows the name John Gottman. So he's one of the godfathers of relational research. He did a study and he concluded that kids, especially that first kid, but especially the first two kids, have the potential to just, the marital satisfaction like drops off a cliff during those first years where you're having those first couple kids. And there's multiple reasons for that. It's not just the stress of the children. And it's because if there's underlying problems in the relationship, which there were for my wife and I, we were not good at conflict resolution. We were not good at just overall vulnerability, where both people can come to each other and be like, hey, so happened, it's me, I just feel distant from you, or that made me feel disrespected. We weren't good at that. We were good at either not talking about it, or one person just feeling like I don't feel comfortable to share, or maybe I can just bury these feelings. Or if one person did share, then one of us would just invalidate the other. Like, this isn't a big deal. You're making too big of a deal of this. Those are relational killers. And people don't realize how detrimental those are to their relationships until you can work through this. When you don't have kids, it's a little bit easier because the positives usually outweigh the negatives. There's not as much stress. As soon as kids come into the picture, now you're entering into it's almost like a wartime environment where your stress levels are higher, everything, you're just more exhausted. And imagine that environment. And now you tack on all those underlying problems that you had in the marriage. It's a disaster in the making. You were always headed for that direction. All you needed was a little bit of exhaustion and a little bit of stress. You didn't know how to resolve conflicts when things were good and not stressful. Imagine now. So this is when people just throw in the towel because they're like, this is too much. And it is. It was, but you were always on that trajectory. You just didn't understand how unhealthy your relationship was before. I feel like, I'm not a therapist, but most people, I make it a passion to study relationships. And from what I've seen, the vast majority of people have superficial, shallow relationships and don't even realize it. And it's usually due to at least one person being intimacy or vulnerability averse. They're not comfortable with it. They don't want to deal with it. It triggers something in them, whether that be shame or just, feeling like I'm going to mess this up or just a fear of it. If I'm vulnerable with somebody, I mean, think about just the word vulnerable. When you're vulnerable with someone, that means you're vulnerable to attack. You're vulnerable. I'm putting myself out there. I'm opening up my heart. And if somebody figuratively squashes it with invalidation or dismissing your feelings or defensiveness, I didn't do that. I didn't say that, gaslighting, whatever it is, it's only natural for you to want to close back up. I don't want to open my heart up to you because you're not a safe place. When you don't have that safety in your relationships, that is the seed that will eventually grow into dissatisfaction and distance and disconnection. And that is the beginning of, in the end, you will say, well, I just married the wrong person. But it wasn't. It was 1,000 little moments along the way that planted those seeds in you that now are growing fruit, which is just I can't stand this person. I hate this person.
When people think about a relationship, like, oh, our relationship is not good, I think oftentimes we think about like there's major conflict, like we're fighting. So I think it's hard for people to understand that not opening up to each other, not being vulnerable, just kind of like two ships passing in the night, like that's also not a good relationship, and it could be so much better. But I think it's easier for people when there's not like these major issues like conflict and fighting and stuff to just kind of days pass, weeks, months, years, and you don't have a fulfilling relationship like you could. But like you were saying, usually one person is averse to like being vulnerable. And when you were saying to be vulnerable, what I was thinking of is like a dog that lays on their back, and like, so someone could attack them. Like that's exactly like a perfect, image. So if one person in the relationship is that way, like, do we recommend that both people go to therapy? Like, how do we resolve that? Like when one person, like I know in our relationship, like obviously I'm very like, I think about this stuff all the time. Like it's what I do for a living. I have a PhD in psychology. I'm very much the opposite of being averse to vulnerability, but my husband is the opposite, So it's like, how do you pull it out of the other person?
That's a great question. You hit the nail on the head in the last sentence. And that's the question I get constantly. How do I pull it out of the other person? So, and this is part of the problem with anxious attachment, codependency, and people pleasing is we can so easily default to how can I control this situation to where because we think that end justifies the means. We think all we really want is connection and closeness. We want intimacy. We want them to open up to us. And if they just did that, they would see that it's in their benefit to do it. They want this too. They want, especially if it's a male, usually they want something from us. They want us to be more friendly. They want us to be, I'm speaking as the proverbial woman. I don't mean to speak for you, but they want something like in the relationship as well. They want companionship. They want something. So we think that, we're just helping them get that. But in reality, we could hurt them because we can't force anyone to do anything. And so often we can really hurt ourselves by thinking, well, if I just bend over backwards a little bit more, if I just say the right words, or how can I get them to care? How can I pull this out of them? And I'm not saying they're not caring. I'm just saying if you're in that situation where you're thinking, how can I reach them? Sometimes we can do ourselves a disservice by getting into that mindset because it's a control mindset. I'm not allowing them to be themselves. Now I need to control them and I need to change them in order for me to feel happy. But what's really happening is we're just panicking on the inside because we're like, I'm not comfortable with this level of intimacy that we have. I'm not comfortable with this disconnection and distance. From their perspective, that's why they keep saying to you, I think things are fine. Things are fine for me. And you're like, but things aren't fine for me. So how do I get them to care about my needs? Well, one, you can't make someone care about your needs. If you've expressed in a loving, healthy way, I'm not comfortable with this level of intimacy that we have, and I would like something to change, and they don't change, that's it. You can't force them to do anything. So now you can read books about how to heal your own anxious attachment. You can learn how to communicate with them in a way that you don't criticize them. I don't want to trigger your shame. I don't want you to feel like I'm calling you a failure. This is what I need from you, and oftentimes they will respond in a positive way. But the other times you have to learn how to stand up for yourself and say, I'm an equal in this relationship, and I'm not just going to like bow out and just like be afraid to bring things up. Like I'm going to be my authentic self. And if I feel like you're disrespecting me, I'm going to tell you in a loving way. If I feel like that you don't care about my needs, I'm going to tell you in a loving way. I'm not just going to kind of like bend over backwards to try to meet your needs even though I don't feel like you're prioritizing mine at all.
Because you read a lot. Have you heard of the couples therapist, Terry Real?
Yes, I can't wait to read his books.
Oh my God, he's the best. And like,
yes, he has a book. He has books. Yeah, there's one called Us that I hear is really good. I can't wait to read that.
Yeah, he has some great, if you search him on YouTube, like really good interviews on YouTube too. But he said this quote that has always stuck with me, and it was how women nowadays, and this is for heterosexual couples, women nowadays are demanding so much more like emotional availability from their male partners. But for the most part, men are not socialized and like they lack the tools, the language, the ability to give women what they want. Would you agree with that statement?
For the most part, I would agree that so many men lack the tools to actually have a healthy, successful relationship. I think that so many men are taught and conditioned and programmed by their fathers and uncles and friends that vulnerability equals weakness. Feelings are for girls, except for anger. You're allowed to feel that one. And that's why we default to it so often, because it's our only. So you'll rarely hear a man say, I feel something other than anger or horny. Like there's just not, they don't know, they don't have a language of feelings. So, but I think that they're just not taught that. I mean, they're essentially not taught empathy and consideration. Like, they're taught if you look weak, then you need to defend yourself. You need to do anything you can to make sure that you're not the bad guy. You're not the failure. So that's why so often when even someone that they love comes to them and says, hey, like when you made fun of me at the party, it made me feel disrespected, or it made me feel, abandoned. They can't even think about what you're saying, because it's immediately, oh, we're playing who's the bad guy, and I don't want to be the bad guy. So like, no. You just misunderstood me. No, I was just joking. And the other person says, it doesn't matter if you were joking. I'm telling you, it hurts my feelings. And they're like, well, no, you just need to lighten up. This is a you problem. See, I'm not the bad guy. I'm not the bad guy here. And it's all of that shame being triggered. It's all of that. You're calling me a failure. And the person's like, I'm not calling you a failure. Like, I'm just trying to connect with you. I'm just trying to like express myself. Is this a safe place for me to tell you that something that you did unintentionally hurt my feelings? And so many men are taught, they're not taught that like, you need to be a safe place for the person that you love to be able to tell you how they feel. Now, that doesn't mean that somebody is just negative all the time, and like that it's okay if we're just like berating our partner with criticisms like you're not getting it right, you're not getting. But I just don't feel like that's the majority of cases. I don't feel like most people are out there to call you a failure. They're essentially just telling you how they feel. The problem comes in is when you dismiss them, when you invalidate them, when you're not a safe place for them. Then, like we said earlier, that disconnection and distance grows. I'm not comfortable with this level of, I don't feel like we have safety. I feel like I need to close back up and not be vulnerable. So then when something happens again, we just get more mad and we escalate because we're not feeling heard. So what do we do when we're not feeling heard by someone that we love? Well, we talk louder, or we poke at them harder. Hey, you're not hearing me. You're not listening to me. And what does that do? Well, that triggers their shame even stronger. And so that's how we get into a dance of nobody really knows how the other person is feeling. And, if you're the people pleaser, it's not your job to always be on the lookout for like managing their emotions. You don't need to worry about always, how do I say the right words so that they won't disrespect me? No, it's not your job. Like if they're consistently disrespecting you, that's a problem. If they're consistently invalidating you, that's a problem. That's not a you problem. That's a them problem. And I don't want to make my channel all about calling men out, but I do want to like warn them, like, hey, I'm not saying that you're the problem and that women don't have things to work on, but like, here are some things that I want you to be working on, regardless of whether, because that's what I get. I get a lot of complaints like, well, this goes both ways.
Mm.
Or how come you're not telling her to work on things? One, I do tell her to work on things in other videos. You just happen to see this video where I'm talking to you specifically. And two, you can work on stuff for you and be a better you, regardless of them. You don't need to look over, well, what are they doing? No, you can learn how to, show up in your relationships. You can empathize. You can learn to empathize and validate. You don't need to wait on her to, to be a better you. So
I feel like resentment plays into this a lot as well. And
absolutely.
I remember you had a video about how telling men you're not just a paycheck and how people get really triggered.
So triggered.
Yes.
Yeah.
So are the majority of your followers women?
Yeah, because men aren't looking up relationship advice.
Yeah.
If they stumble upon it, it's by accident or because their wife sent it to him or their girlfriend sent it to him, which is another trigger, because what man wants to be sent a video? Hey, here you go. This guy gets it. Why can't you be more like him?
Exactly.
What man is going to respond well to that? So that's why I encourage a lot of people in my videos, if you're thinking about sending this to him, just be careful. If you think he's going to respond in a negative way, then that's an emotional safety issue. If you don't think you can go to him and have a conversation, if this is your resort, well, he doesn't listen to me, so I'm going to send him your video. Well, that's not going to work. I can promise you that's just going to end in him feeling triggered once again. So I should probably say that counseling helps so much, because when you get into counseling and you're sitting in front of somebody who can hold you both accountable, once you start these fights, this dance that I'm talking about, once you go round and round in this dance, the counselor should stop you and say, hold on. Let's go back to the very beginning statement. She said this, or he said this. Let's dissect that statement right there. What was the intent behind that statement? What did you hope would happen, and what actually happened? And all of a sudden, once you start dissecting these things and the intention behind them, what was the feeling behind them, you start to see so when what I said was actually invalidating you, and I can understand how you could see that you could feel that I wasn't really paying attention to your feelings. I wasn't really seeing your perspective in all this. I was so scared that you were calling me a failure that I had to defend myself. But I can see now that just left you feeling more unheard and alone. And once you start doing that, and the counselor really shows you the chess pieces, you start to see that oh, this is just the same dance that we get caught in. We're not really arguing about, it's not really about the dishes, is it? It's about that you feel alone and you feel neglected. And whether or not I want to concede, I tell men all the time, even if you don't feel like you're neglecting her, the fact that she feels neglected should still matter to you, because you're in a partnership. You're equals in this partnership. So she says, I feel neglected. You should still care about that. I mean, her feelings are valid, even if you don't agree with them. So, and if you want something out of this partnership, like love and companionship and intimacy, closeness, then caring about someone's feelings is actually the literal bare minimum. So I want to help men. I don't want to shame them by saying, I don't think you know how to do that, because you get so triggered. And that's normal because of what you've gone through. It's normal for you to have these triggers and these fears and these, I just don't know how to manage this. But if you listen, I just want to help you manage this without calling you the problem.
Yeah. It always fascinates me how some men see even content that I make, and their comment is oh, wow, I've never thought about it that way. I'm going to start looking at my wife differently, or they approach it with that,
Yes.
versus others who are just immediately shut it down.
Absolutely.
Who do you think you are? So it always fascinates me how there's such a divide between how people receive
Absolutely.
this kind of content.
How people receive constructive criticism is probably a massive tell. If I could give one piece of dating advice, how do they receive constructive criticism or feedback? Because criticism has a negative connotation. How do they receive constructive feedback? Because that will tell you a lot about a person.
Yeah.
So, but you're right, and I get wonderful emails from men saying, I didn't take this in a negative way. I didn't feel like you were attacking me. I don't want. They say, you know what? A lot of the things that you're saying, my wife or my wife or girlfriend has said the exact same thing. And hearing it from your mouth and the things that you've gone through, and that I realize that you're just trying to like protect my relationship. Like, I'm more open to like hearing her now. And it's sad that it has to be that way, because a lot of women say, that's why a lot of women like my content, because they're like, well, if a man is saying this, maybe my man will listen to him.
It's validating what they're
it's very validating
feeling. Totally.
But I also get trapped because obviously a lot of women take it as ammunition in a way. They're like, oh, I'm not the problem. I'm not at all the problem. It's him. He's the problem. So I'm going to send him these videos and I'm going to hit him over the head with these videos. And it's like, oftentimes playing the who's the problem game is not helpful. Like, the more helpful thing is to say, we are stuck in a dynamic here and it's not working for me. Is it working for you? Do you like the fact that we're fighting all the time? Because even if you don't mind it, you should mind that I mind it. And that's the point where people pleasers and anxious attachment and codependence, they have to learn assertiveness. Is that difficult? Yeah, absolutely. When you your own have fears that, you have fears of being abandoned, or you have fears of being alone, or you have fears that he might leave you or she might leave you. The problem is that they're supposed to leave you. Like, this relationship is unhealthy. One of you is supposed to be leaving the other, but you don't, because you can't. And so coming at it from that perspective of like, this dynamic that we have is not working. So let's go and talk to a professional about it. And that's when they can help break down, hopefully, if you have a good counselor, or just read some good books.
Yeah.
Read Hold Me Tight by Sue Johnson. Read 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work by Gottman.
Yeah, I love Sue Johnson's stuff. It's so
Absolutely.
fascinating. She was a professor at where I did my PhD. She was,
right?
University of Ottawa.
That's awesome.
Anywho, so the reason I came across your profile, I made this TikTok and shared it to Instagram also. And it was about how the commute home from work is a time to decompress. Like, compared to being home all day taking care of little children, a commute is like luxury vacation. Like, I will take that I look forward to driving, putting in a podcast, like chilling.
Oh my gosh.
And so people kept sending me your reel
in
my DMs because you talked about that as well. And I was like shocked that somebody else talked about that, because it's such like a small little niche thing to consider.
That all stay-at-home parents understand.
Yes. And so, and people like lost their damn minds when I put that out, because they were like, are you kidding me? A commute is a break. And I was like, listen, if you don't consider a commute a break, consider yourself lucky, because some people do consider that a break when you're home with little kids. So where did that come from for you? And like, what are your thoughts on that?
So I'm going to forget everything that I want to say because I'm just too excited. But, okay. So I get those messages too. When I post that video got a lot of backlash, obviously, because once again, primarily the male audience felt like I was attacking them. Like, once again, I'm attacking you, and now I'm attacking your drive home for all things. So, here's the thing. Anybody that says that a commute is not a break, anyone who says that, I can promise you're not the default parent at home with the kids or on the weekends or whenever. You are not the default parent. I promise you that much, because the default parent would 100% consider that a break. I made another video, this is just a side tangent, on how a shower is a break. And women lost their minds because, and rightfully so, because they're in relationships where they don't feel like they get a break at all. They're like, a shower is not a break. Like, it's a basic human necessity. And I was like, you're absolutely right that it's a basic, you should obviously be able to shower. You shouldn't have a partner that like, you can't even rely on your partner to watch the children while you go shower. But really it is a break because like you deserve that break away from a shower is okay. So this will make a little bit more sense in a second. So about a year ago, I took over as stay-at-home parent. My wife got a great job opportunity. I'm a nurse normally, not right now, but I'm a nurse. And I quit my job, and she's a PA and she does heart surgery, and she's making great money. Great for her. I took over as the stay-at-home parent. So I go from working parent to stay-at-home default parent, where everything is now, it's a different world.
Mm-hmm.
So any man that's watching, you know, the two men that are watching,
Yeah.
if your partner was the stay-at-home parent before and you're or if your partner's the stay-at-home parent now and you're the working parent, you should step into those shoes just for a short time, because it'll open your eyes to the world that they have been living in, where they don't even feel like they can take a shower without. So like I said before, I have 4 kids under 9, and now I am the stay-at-home parent. I'm the default parent. I'm the one making the lunches. I'm the one doing the dishes. I'm the one clean as good as I can. But, you know, I do have my limitations. But I'm doing, we have, at the time he was 2-year-old, now he's a 3-year-old. But you know the world that is, where it's just like they're constantly, once they know how to open doors, there's, you know, they're running outside and it's complete chaos. I mean, it's complete and utter chaos. So I wanted to make that video because I'm like, I get a lot of messages from people saying like that the working parent comes home and wants to take a break. I don't want to say it's men, but it's mostly men, because I've never heard of a woman that's working that comes home and is like, well, I need a 30-minute break now to decompress and, you know, pour me a bourbon because I'm going to go in my study and watch the news. Mm-hmm. You just continue making dinner and, you know, with the baby on your hip. So I wanted to make that video just to validate and say, like, we as men, like, we can't do that. We can never. This is not 1940 anymore. Do not come home and need a decompression time. Your drive home was the decompression time. That was 30 minutes. You didn't have any babies crawling at you. You didn't have people screaming at you. You weren't handing out any snacks, and you didn't have to make dinner. So like that is a decompression time. And obviously people were like, no, like traffic is terrible. I'm like, I could not, you're in a different world. Like I can't even argue with you, because you don't even understand what it's like to be at home with the kids going crazy, screaming at you while you're trying to make dinner, while you're trying to get ready for the other, like we can't even have this argument because you won't understand what I'm talking about until you live that. And then you're like, I need to get out of here. Wherever else besides here is a break. If the kids aren't around me, I don't care what I'm doing. I will literally I'd sit in traffic some days. Like, anyways, so I'm clearly going off on a tangent, but the drive home is a break. I don't care. You can be wrong if you want to, but the drive home is a break.
I know people used to lose their minds because during quarantine, I was very much so the default parent at home with an 18-month-old. My husband's a physician, so he was working his regular job during COVID. And that's when I started to really understand what it feels like to be a stay-at-home parent to small children.
Yeah.
And my mind was blown. And so that's why I started talking about all these things. But one of the things was on weekends, I would finally be like, yes, like my husband is home all weekend. Like my life is going to change. But then at the weekend, like a Saturday would come and he would make a big breakfast Saturday morning. So now I'm still watching Milo all morning. Then he would clean up the breakfast. He would like go organize recycling in the garage. Then he would cut the grass. And I was like, this is not okay. Like,
at what point are you going to take this child from me?
Exactly. And
they're like, what?
But when I started making TikToks about that, of course, people get so defensive and they're like, well, are you going to go cut the grass? And I was like, you know what? I did go cut the grass because I need a break from my job, which is childcare.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But people don't understand that part of it. Like,
no.
Default parents, stay-at-home parents want a break from their job. Their job is 24/7.
It's nonstop.
Yes.
I mean, it's just not something that the working parent sometimes, especially if it's the man that we talked about earlier, like the tools and just not really understanding how to get involved in other people's worlds. And that's what I hope to, I just want them to, I don't want them to feel like I'm calling them wrong, but like, I just want you to get involved in her world.
And understand it. Yeah. And like my husband was shocked. I was like, can you not make pancakes Saturday morning? Can you not go cut the grass? Can you not do laundry? And he was like, wait a minute. You don't want me to do those things? Because to him, he feels like he's being productive.
That's exactly what's happening. And that's why I say, obviously, of course, I want both partners to get into each other's worlds, because we shouldn't chastise them right away. Like they just don't understand the situation per se. I don't think everything is weaponized incompetence. Like TikTok would make you believe, there's so many people that are so angry. They're just looking, and of course they've been mistreated, and I get that, but like not everything is weaponized incompetence. Sometimes your husband wasn't doing anything to intentionally harm you or neglect you. He just didn't really realize that that his world, like he needs to step into a new role where it's like, I'm going to I'm now with her in this. It's not just separate anymore. Now we're together. And I talk a lot about that, about how when it comes to the dishes and the laundry and especially watching the kids, like these are all issues that have to do with trust. Like even if you unintentionally just don't prioritize those things and you're like, well, I don't really think about that stuff. That really hurts the relationship from a standpoint of trust, because that person feels like they can't rely on you. And that always hurts things.
Yeah. And I also feel sometimes it's difficult for moms to express to their partners that they would like a break from childcare, because there's guilt involved with it.
And so many people say, when I get that break, I have to guilt trip him into giving me a break, because he pushes back, and then I have to I have to essentially beg for a break. And then as soon as I get the break, then we run into multiple different problems where he's not really taking care of the kids like he should. He's not really watching the 3-year-old. The 3-year-old's at the neighbor's house 2 doors down, and you come home and you're like, where is he? And they're like, oh, well, yeah, I think he's around. And so that obviously opens up where now you don't want to take a break in the future, because you're like, I can't trust you. I can't trust you with your own kids. You called me 5 minutes after I left to say, what are they going to eat? Or they're hungry, or no, you're their parent too. You have to step up and be a parent with me. And I get it that there's a learning curve, but at the same time, come on, are you with me in this or not? I'm not in charge of feeding them. You're home too.
Yeah, I always say, if you can't just up and leave for a few days,
absolutely,
there is a problem. I can up and leave. Yeah. I went to LA 10 days. My husband worked full time.
Oh, I love
did
that.
Everything. So it's funny because next week I'm supposed to go on this morning show in Toronto to talk about default parenting. And so they were asking me a little bit about it, almost to give a definition and things that I wanted to talk about. And one of the things was, how do families fall into that dynamic, and how to prevent your family from falling into this dynamic where one parent is default childcare.
Yep.
And I was thinking about how we have done things with our son. And from day one, my husband has been so involved with everything. We have done everything together, meal times, prepping meals, bath time, bedtime routine. It has been like that since day one. And I think what happens is a lot of the times it's the mom that takes maternity leave. And so she is so used to doing childcare in Canada, we do maternity leave. But even in the States, you're going to be home for the first few weeks with the child. And so it's easier for them when their partner comes home from work now to just, I'll just do it. And then it snowballs and it continues. And so how do you, what would your advice be to people who are listening who are maybe expecting their first child or are in the default parent dynamic, how to get out of that?
So there's a good book. I haven't read it yet, but I've been doing this long enough to where people have recommended this book over and over and over. So it has to be an amazing book. It's called Fair Play.
Yes.
I'm sure you've heard of it.
Yes, of course.
So if you're in that dynamic, obviously read that book. But at the heart of that book, I haven't read it, so I'm not talking about the book per se. I'm just talking about at the heart of that book has to be, there are things that need to get done. We can all agree that there's things that need to get done. We can also agree that not everything is, clearly one person usually feels like I'm taking on too much. So now we're back to having a healthy conversation. Can we actually have a healthy conversation about divvying up the mutual chores? What is my responsibility? What is your responsibility? And what are mutual things? If there's dishes in the sink, we both do those. That's a mutual chore. If you see a dish in the sink, wash the dish. It's not I don't need to take on the dishes unless you are traditional, unless you're no, I do the dishes. I don't let my man touch the dishes. That's great. Do whatever you want. Like, it all just stems from, do you feel unappreciated or neglected in a certain area? But it obviously comes back to having a safe conversation about delegating tasks. I mean, which you should be able to do. The reason we don't have those is because there's some sort of, we take on too much. We have a propensity to just take on too much, to sweep our needs under the rug. Like, maybe I'm just being too overbearing. We start to feel neglected. We feel like they don't give a crap about, like, how come they can't wash a dish? But then we don't go to them vulnerably and say, listen, when you don't wash, like, I feel like I'm the only one washing the dishes. Do you feel like I'm the only one washing the dishes? Like, how can we work together on this? Because it's really making me feel like abandoned in this relationship. It makes me feel like my time isn't as valuable as yours. I know you don't care about the dishes, but I'm telling you, I really care about the dishes. And it goes a long way if you see a dish in the sink, do the dishes. Like, there's a good book by Matthew Frey, This Is How Your Marriage Ends. And he has a blog too. And that was his main thing. It's like, he's like, I don't care about the stupid dishes. So why should I care about that? And he said, over time, it's those little things that add up in the relationship where it's like, I don't care about this, so I'm not going to care about this. And eventually that just leads to distance and disconnection over, you add those up over, it's a death by 1,000 paper cuts, as he says. And anyway, so those things all go back to the main point of, like, can I actually rely on my partner? Can I trust my partner?
Yeah. And I remember reading one of your captions, and it said something about how, like, it's not a competition of who had the most stressful day.
Absolutely.
It's being able to open up to your partner and be like, you know what, like, when you come home from work, I'd really appreciate it if you came and, like, sat down with us for a little bit before you start. Yeah. And then we can decide, like, as a couple, like, who's going to make dinner, who's going to, get stuff ready for school the next day. Like,
yep.
It's being able to verbalize your needs, but also, like, having compassion for the other person. And if my husband's like, oh, I had a terrible day, like, okay, like, I'm willing to take over some things this evening to make his life easier. Or, like, he really cares about not having dishes in the sink when he gets home. So when I have time, I try and make an effort to make sure the dishes are away. And, like, he knows that I care about certain things. So he'll try to, it's like, if you don't have that mentality in your relationship and you're not helping each other out, it's not like a team. It's like you're combative instead. Yeah.
It all just comes down to mutual respect and consideration.
Yeah.
If one person cares about something, I just feel like we should care about that. That doesn't mean it's about right and wrong. Like, it's not, like I said in the beginning, it's not really about the dishes per se. Sometimes it is about this, just do the freaking dishes. Other times it's about that person. The dishes are a symbol of, like, they don't feel like you care about them. It's
or
not
their
long,
time or their
time. Yeah. And the problem that I see over and over is usually women that say, yeah, but I can't, he doesn't care. When I sit down and I tell him about it, he doesn't care. And I'm like, so what you just described, you're essentially admitting that this relationship can't work because there's certain things that a relationship needs. Mutual respect and mutual consideration is one of them. If you don't have that, you don't actually have a partnership, or you won't for long, because, like, what do you have?
Yeah.
I mean, two people can live together, sure. But, like, if you actually want closeness and intimacy and friendship and a great sex life, well, unfortunately, like my bio, that requires things of you. And that's what stuck in my brain. Like, well, what does love require of me? And it sent me on that journey of, like, all this stuff that I'm learning. Like, love requires things. It's not easy. It's not designed to be easy. You it's kind of like a reap what you sow situation. Like, you don't get a great crop unless you plant some great seed,
Totally. Before you go,
I hope it wasn't too dark. I'm sorry.
No. I love this. We're all about, like, honest, real life conversations here. So it's actually perfect. Where can people find you online, and tell us about your podcast that you started? Is it out already?
Yeah. Yeah. It's called Ricky and Jimmy on Relationships. I teamed up with my good friend, Ricky Close. She wrote a book called The Anxious Heart's Guide. And it's on Apple and Spotify. We're like 10 episodes in, but we really enjoy just chit-chatting about relationships. And then I'm Jimmy on relationships, pretty much anywhere people watch, TikTok and YouTube and stuff.
Awesome. And what's your plans for you're just going to be like content creator? Like, do you have any like goals, dreams?
So I do have dreams, but unfortunately, so now that I'm in this stay-at-home parent role, anyone who is a stay-at-home parent knows how much free time they have. So I have an extremely limited amount of free time. So I try to write as many videos as I can, and then I have to film those videos and edit them and all that other stuff. So right now, I'm just so excited to get this opportunity to be this little influence. And I've been so blessed so far. My following has grown, but I just don't have any free time. So I'm really excited for when my kids get old enough to where they start school, and then I can just go full-time content creator. But right now my job is default parenting, and everyone knows how stressful that can be.
But it makes for great ideas for content, right?
It does make for great ideas. I don't know if men would agree, but it makes for great ideas. It's wonderful to get into the mind of so many, not most women, but so many women are the default parent and the stay-at-home parent. And I think that's why my content tends to be a little bit more validating, because it's like, oh, wait, a man stepped into that role and now he's realizing like, wait, so this is really hard. Has anybody been talking about how hard this is?
Yeah. And it's funny because you always see men comment on TikTok when it's videos that address these kinds of topics. You see the comments of, oh yeah, like I was the parent during quarantine and like it changed my life. Like that was crazy.
Oh, yeah.
So when they have the opportunity to be in that role, they seem to change their tune a little bit. But anyhow.
But this was great. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you so much for coming on, and we will chat soon.
And I'm on a roll.